So welcome back. We talk this time about John Donne, and today we'll focus on his poetry. But first, I'll give you a little background information because I think it's super important when you talk about John Donne. Now, Donne was born as into a Catholic family. They were recusants, and he came. I mean, a really strong pedigree in English Catholic martyrdom. His mother was a niece or a grandniece of Thomas More. John Haywood, the poet, was another of his relatives who was punished for maintaining his Catholicism. And Donne's younger brother Henry, when they were both at college, or at least Henry was still at college, was was caught harboring a priest in his rooms at Oxford, and he was put in prison and caught cholera there and died. So I often think of Donne as suffering from a kind of post-traumatic stress disorder, and I'm not kidding. I mean, I really think this shows through his poetry and through his life. I mean, he was definitely somebody suffering, you know, existential questions, but also, I mean, religious questions, which obsessed him throughout his life, even in his early period when he tried to, I wouldn't say reject, but tried to become a kind of a secular figure. Religious questions, obsessed him, possessed him. He couldn't let go of it, and that's so often, and even his what we could call his secular poetry, it's filled with religious imagery and tropes and conceits. Uh, it's it's inescapable. It's so part of his psyche, and I think part of this, his Catholic psyche, I can call it. His mother was the sister of Ellis and Jasper Haywood, both Jesuits, and Jasper for a time had been the head of the Jesuit mission in England. So he was, he was as connected as you can get to the Catholic underground as you can get. Um, I'm not sure what happened. I'm guessing he had some disagreements or problems with with the Jesuits. He certainly wrote violently against them later in life. Now, is he overcompensating to prove that he's not a Catholic sympathizer? It's possible, but I do think there was something, you know, that many people probably go through that traumatized him in his youth concerning the Jesuits. And certainly, one thing that traumatized him was the idea of martyrdom. And it's my suspicion that John Donne in 1585 or 82, when Edmund Campion was martyred, he was a Jesuit. I'm pretty sure we can assume that Donne's mother, as vehement a Catholic as she was, would have taken him to the execution of Edmund Campion. I'm certain of it. There's no documentary evidence because no one's gonna leave the information like that out. Oh, went to see a martyr die. You know, took my kids. But it is very possible, and I assume it's true that Donne knew Robert Southwell, because in his book Pseudo Martyr, which is kind of a extended polemic against the Jesuit embrace of martyrdom, that he wrote that he was once present in prison, visiting somebody in prison with his mother, at a discussion of whether the Queen could still be styled blessed, or however they put it, meaning the anointed of God. And this is actually something that shows up in the writing of Robert Southwell. So I'm pretty sure that he at least met Southwell one time, and I would not be surprised if very often he received communion from Robert Southwell. In fact, he was catechized by Southwell as well. And I'm equally sure, though there's no proof, that he was probably present or deeply aware of the moment when Sutherland 1595 was executed for treason or martyred, depending on how you want to describe it. So I'm sure this is I know this is something that lives in Donne. Whether he was really present at those or not, though I strongly suspect he was, it's extraordinary the depth of Jesuitism that is in him, in even as much as he repudiates the Jesuits, not only in Pseudo-Martyr, but in a book he wrote in both Latin and English, Ignatius his Conclave, which is also kind of a satire, polemic against the Jesuits. Nevertheless, it shows up through all of his work, right up to the last thing he did. He wrote his Death's Duel, basically he wrote his own funeral sermon. But we'll talk about that next time. But today we'll talk about his poetry. Now, Donne was widely attested to have been the poet during his time most circulated in manuscript and in coteries. He shows up in miscellanies. He shows up in manuscript all over the place throughout this period of history. And he was such a popular poet, and I'm not surprised. He was doing such new things with poetry. He had such a wide-ranging range of interests and cleverness and ingenuity. We talked last time about how Philip Sidney, was really trying to establish an English literary tradition, and ingenuity was part of what Sidney was proposing, and Donne shows it left and right in his poetry. And I thought we'd look at a few poems. You could do people do. You could do a whole course on Donne and still basically just essentially scratch the surface of his genius. Well, let's take a look at a couple poems. And I won't read the entire poem to, but I'll just tell you which one we're doing, and you can follow along in whatever edition you're using. The first one I want to look at is his poem, A Valediction Forbidding Mourning, which he wrote for his wife. Actually, I should point out that he was kind of rebellious, and he was educated, but he couldn't take a degree since he was Catholic, and he became a secretary to Lord Egerton, and ended up eloping without permission with Egerton's niece, and then went to jail for it. It was hard to get his marriage recognized at first, and he and his wife lived in poverty for a long time because of this kind of rash decision. Yet you can tell from the poetry, and he wrote quite a few poems for his wife, how deeply in love with her he was. And this is a Valediction Forbidding Mourning. It's probably, he had to leave. And they had quite a number of children, only 6 of whom survived Donne, but I see numbers up to 17 children. But in A Valediction Forbidding Mourning, which is a farewell poem to his wife as he went to travel, you can see how saturated the poem is with religious and theological ideas. I'll just read a little bit of it, read the opening. As virtuous men pass mildly away and whisper to their souls to go, while some of their sad friends do say, the breath goes now and some say no, so let us melt and make no noise, no tear floods nor sigh tempests move. 'Twere profanation of our joys to tell the laity our love. It's right there. 'Twere profanation of our joys to tell the laity our love. So, in a way, he's elevating his love for his wife, and I shouldn't say elevating, recognizing his love for his wife in theological terms, to tell the laity. Who are the laity? The laity are the ones not connected to this love. right? And is this not right? God is love, St. John, right? God is love, and they who abide in love abide in God. So Donne's drawing on that, and he's doing a really, and he married for love. He didn't marry for position. He married for love, and that was, in his social sphere, that was not a typical move. So he's very modern, and he's very independent. And he continues in this poem. This is the fourth stanza, when he says, "Dull sublunary lovers love, whose soul is sense, cannot admit absence, because it doth remove those things which elemented it. But we by a love are so much refined, that ourselves know not what it is, enter assured of the mind, careless eyes, lips, and hands to miss." And then he continues, "Our two souls, therefore, which are one, though I must go, endure not yet a breach, but an expansion, like gold to airy thinness beat." And here you can see, not only is he combining theological notions of God's absence, for instance, and he's comparing their being absent to one another with God's absence, but also he brings in alchemy to it, which is interesting. He's a exact contemporary of the German mystic Jakob Boehme, and Boehme couldn't find an adequate language to describe his mystical experiences, so he brought he borrowed some alchemical language into it, which is what the same thing that Donne does. He's trying to stretch not only our imagination, but stretch our understanding, and show us something new. And there he says, "Our two souls, therefore, which are one, though I must go, endure not yet a breach, but an expansion, like gold to airy thinness beat." Now here, it means using theological notions, right? With marriage makes the two one, right? So their souls are just one. But he also brings in notions of alchemy, right? With like gold to airy thinness beat. And that's just in gold, right? So to continue with what he was saying about this, you could say the permanence and alchemy of gold, right? It's incorruptible, and so he's saying the same. He's comparing their marriage to the same thing, which is what it is in the eyes of God, right? But he said not a breach, but an expansion, right? So he, as the story goes, he was heading to Germany and would be gone for a while, and his wife, all these children. I think she was pregnant as well at the time, and but he's saying that, listen, we're married, so we cannot be separated. We have one soul between us, so it doesn't matter where I go. Our souls are one. And then he comes to this exemplary conceit, which is really bizarre, but really I think it's just beautiful. And he says about their souls. Well, if they be two, they are two, so as stiff twin compasses are two. Right? Thy soul the fixed foot makes no show to move, but doth if the other do. So Anne, his wife, she's the fixed foot of the compass, and he, as he expands, he moves out to Germany. But even as he moves, the other side moves too. It just doesn't move from its spot. It moves in a circular direction. And though it in the center sit, yet when the other doth far roam, it leans and hearkens after it, and grows erect as that comes home. Which is beautiful. A nice way to think about marriage as a compass. Such thou wilt thou be to me, who must, like the other foot, obliquely run. Thy firmness makes my circle just, and makes me end where I begun. Extraordinary, extraordinary poem. And another, let's take a look now at Air and Angels, which we won't, it's a short poem, but boy is it complicated, and we won't get too much into it. But let me just read some of it here. Twice or thrice had I loved thee before I knew thy face or name. So in a voice, so in a shapeless flame, angels affect us oft, and worshipped be. Still when to where thou wert I came, some lovely glorious nothing I did see. But since my soul, whose child love is, takes limbs of flesh, and else could nothing do, more subtle than the parent is, love must not be, but take a body too. Therefore, what thou wert, and who I bid love ask, and now that assume thy body I allow, and fix itself in lip, eye, and brow. Well, thus to ballast love I thought, and so more steadily to have gone. With wares which would sink admiration I saw, and I had love's pinnace overfraught. Ever thy hair for love to work upon is much too much. Some fitter must be sought. For nor in nothing, nor in things extreme and scattering bright can love inhere. Then is an angel, face and wings of air, not pure is it, yet pure doth wear. So thy love may be my love's fear, just such disparity as is twixt air and angel's purity, twixt women's love and men's will ever be. Right? Very. This poem's given many critics a lot of trouble. It's like, what's he saying? Is he saying that the difference between air and angels? Boy, it's subtle, right? Because air is substantial, it's natural, and the angel is supernatural. But they're so close in air is the most rarefied, how they understood at the time, the most rarefied of substances, and angels, you could say, are the most, not really physical, but they're closer to human than any other celestial being. So kind of an interesting pull on that, and just it's worth thinking about quite a bit. So I just wanted to bring it to your attention. I don't want to dwell on it too much. I've got a few more poems I want to hit before we finish. Another one, it's still another love poem, but which also he combines with theological overtones and also you could say scientific overtones, is The Ecstasy, one of his more anthologized poems in recent decades. And so many things in this poem. And you have to think, I should point out that in the early modern period, one of the books most often published or put out in editions was the Song of Songs in the early days of print, say most of the 16th century and into the 17th. It just was a very, very popular book. And Donne is drawing on lots of those ideas here. Now, the traditional monastic interpretation of the Song of Songs, it's a poem about God's love for the church, or God for Israel. But we know now that the Song of Songs is actually an ancient Mideastern love poem that was preserved in the Bible in a religious context, so we could think of it like that. So the erotics of it, right? And Donne, in a way, is saying he's taken back the Song of Songs to love poetry throughout his erotic verse. So in The Ecstasy, for instance, one of the things that's fascinating is to look at the third stanza, where he's talking. Well, even the second stanza, right? He's talking about the two lovers holding each other's hands and looking into each other's eyes. Our hands were. This is second stanza. Our hands were firmly cemented with a fast balm which thence did spring. And here's the weird part. Our eye beams twisted, and did thread our eyes upon one double string. The atomic theory, right? So that when you look at, there's actually atoms going from your eye to whatever you see. And here he's seeing these two lovers and connected by the gaze, right? And then he extends this conceit, so to engraft our hands, as yet was all the means to make us one, right? So their hands are joined, their eyes, and this, sometimes this needs a little unpacking. And pictures in our eyes to get was all our propagation. They called this making babies in the early modern period. So if you look deeply into another person's eyes, and the other person looks into yours, you see a reflection of yourself. And they called that making babies. That's the image of our baby, right? He looks just like his father, you know. So that's why he says, and pictures in our eyes to get was all our propagation. And very often for Donne, these kinds of spiritual or intellectual, these ideas, almost Platonic, it's the relationship starts there, and all it needs to do is become physical afterwards. This is part of one of the conceits in. He draws on this kind of idea in *The Flea*, a really famous poem of his, which I won't get into because you probably read it many times. And then he continues this. He ramps up this conceit with every paragraph, or with every stanza. And the next one he says, "As twixt two equal armies, fate suspends uncertain victory. Our souls, which to advance their state were gone out, hung betwixt her and me." So now it's a clothesline. It's hang souls. It's just, and this is the thing that Ben Jonson, or even Samuel Johnson, said. It's just too crazy. This is not poetry. This is fireworks. And you'd have to admit that Donne is, what he does in a lot of these poems, they're kind of virtuoso pieces. They're pyrotechnics. And then he goes back, and I'm going to move ahead a few stanzas here. When he starts, when love with one another so interanimates two souls, that abler soul, which thence thus flow, defects of loneliness controls. We, then, who are this new soul, here goes that same image used in the other poem, know of what we are composed and made, for the atomies of which we grow our souls, whom no change can invade. But, oh alas, so long, so far our bodies, why do we forbear? They're ours, though they're not we. We are the intelligences, they the spheres. This is the idea this is Ptolemaic astrology, where the idea and taken up in the Middle Ages by Christianity. The idea in astrology is that the spheres, or the planets, are the visible part, and they associated an angel with each one, right? So when you see me, for instance, you see my physical body, but you don't see my soul, which animates my body. Similarly, when we see the planets, we see Venus, but we don't see the angel, the intelligence that animates it, that gives it life and movement, right? And this is what Donne's drawing on here in the poem. And there's so many good things in this poem. Sorry, I get going on John Donne. Then the second to last stanza, as he's meditating on at that spiritual or soul level of their relationship, but he gets back to the body, and he says, "To our bodies turn we then, that so weak men on love revealed may look. So it's funny, Okay, let's return to our bodies so we can give people an example of what love looks like. Love's mysteries and souls do grow, but yet the body is his book. And if some lover such as we have heard this dialogue of one, let him still mark us. He shall see small change when we are to bodies gone. Pretty incredible. I mean, it's just, and it's interesting that after Donne's lifetime, his collected poems came out, I think, 1633, 1631. Kind of faded from memory, and it was not until really T.S. Eliot kind of rediscovered Donne and made him cool again, and thank God he did. And but you can tell. I mean, this is what we said. Ben Jonson said he was a great poet, but he would not be read in the future because he was so difficult. And I think that's true. I think it's also was true of William Blake. People did not know what to make of William Blake, even during his lifetime. And it took a long time. It took them to really till the 20th century, early 20th century, late 19th, early 20th century, till people grew to the level where they could get Blake finally. Before that, they just thought he was a madman. And now let's take a look at Donne's more overtly religious poems, where he certainly had I wouldn't say a conversion. I mean, you can see he's always, religious ideas always possess him, but I think what happened is he didn't have much in the way of prospects. And in 1606, I think, he was offered a benefice if he would enter into Anglican orders, and he's still Catholic. He's like, can't do that. I can't do it. Can't do it. He just couldn't do it. Well, he eventually had to do it because he was trying to find advancement in other ways, and King James apparently liked him. But King James said, "I will have Mr. Donne nowhere but in the church." And so Donne eventually, and I think it was a shotgun wedding. I mean, he certainly had problems with Jesuitism and some politics in the Catholic Church, but he was Catholic. I mean, he really just was. And so he played the good Protestant, I think. And he was a good Protestant. And the other thing with him is he didn't see what the big deal was. Why does there have to be division? And he writes about this in one of his satires, but also in an early book, Essays in Divinity, which we won't talk about in this course. But in Essays in Divinity, I think he wrote it as a way for him to work out his own religious perplexities, trying to figure out what he's going to do. Why do we have martyrs? Why are we killing each other? Really? And of course, going back to my post-traumatic stress disorder thesis. Now, of his holy sonnets, we'll only want to look at one and closely and mention another one. But he wrote these, most people assume, before he entered Anglican orders as a priest. And let's read his probably his most popular of the holy sonnets, "Batter my heart. Batter my heart, three-person God, for you, as yet but knock, breathe, shine, and seek to mend. That I may rise and stand, o'erthrow me, and bend your force to break, blow, burn, and make me new. I, like an usurped town to another do, labor to admit you, but oh, to no end. Reason, your viceroy in me should defend, but is captived, and proves weak or untrue. Yet dearly I'll love you, and one beloved fain, but am betrothed unto your enemy. Divorce me, untie or break that knot again. Take me to you, imprison me, for I, except you enthrall me, never shall be free, nor ever chaste, except you ravish me." Now, talk about eros in poetry, right? So much in this poem. And no, well, a lot of cool things he does there. He's just a virtuoso. But if you notice in the second line, he says, "And yet, but knock, breathe, shine, and seek to mend," which are all have biblical relationship with knock. For instance, knock on the door, the door will be opened. Right? I am the light of the earth. I am the light of the world. Right? Seek and you shall find. But then those four words get transformed into something more violent 2 lines later. So, and then he says, "That I may rise and stand, overthrow me, and bend your force to break, blow, burn, and make me new." So knock becomes break, breathe becomes blow, shine becomes burn, and seek becomes make. So there's some off rhymes there, but also he takes it up a notch, right? He intensifies the register of the language, So brings it almost takes it up to a more violent register of these gentler terms, which is extraordinary because that's what the poem's about, right? Right? Batter my heart, 3-person God. And then he says, there's all this sexual innuendo here. "That I may rise and stand, overthrow me and bend your force." Right? Now, rise was Elizabethan, early modern slang for erection. So that I may rise and stand. Stand also was slang for erection. "Overthrow me and bend your force to break, blow, and burn, and make me new." I mean, that's when you read it in those terms, you're like, yow, right? And then he changes it in the next quatrain where he says, "I, like an usurped town to another do, labor to admit you." So notice, in the first stanza, the speaker is speaking of himself in male sexual imagery. Here, it's female. "Labor to admit you, but oh, to no end." And then it goes on, "Yet dearly I love you and would be loved fain, but am betrothed unto your enemy." Of course, Satan, right? Through sin. Right? And betrothed, once you're betrothed, it's a deal is a deal in this early modern culture, right? But then he says, no. "Divorce me. Untie or break that knot again. Take me to you." Speaking to God, right? "Imprison me." And then, now, Donne is, Rosalie Colley, in I think 1966, wrote a book called Paradoxica Epidemica, and uses Donne as his example of this paradox tradition. And especially when we look at Death's Duel in the next lecture, Donne is all about the paradoxes, right? So the paradox here, right? He ends with paradox. "Imprison me," he says, "for except you enthrall me, never shall I be free." Right? "Unless I'm imprisoned by God, I cannot be free, nor ever chaste, except you ravish me." So I can't be, so bluntly, I can never be pure unless I am raped by God. There's a paradox. There's a paradox. So it's pretty intense poem, which is why it's fun to teach this. I mean, in this context, but when I work with college students, boy, it's fun to teach that. Like, whoa, I didn't get that, Professor Martin. Well, you're getting it now, son. Now, the other thing I just want to mention in passing of the Holy Sonnets. In the first lecture, we read a poem by William Alabaster, and I told you that his poem was or actually John Donne's poem, "I Am a Little World Made Cunningly," is in conversation with Alabaster's poem, which also talks in terms of microcosm and macrocosm. So we won't read the whole thing. I just want to mention it too, but I'll read the first couple of lines. "I am a little world made cunningly, of elements and an angelic sprite. But black sin hath betrayed to endless night my world's both parts. Both parts must die. Beautiful poem. I mean, and there's such powerful. You can see, there's, such a almost violent energy in his work. You know what I mean? Violent sexual male energy, and not really. I don't know. I mean, I just don't know how to describe it. It's intense. It is intense. But he can even when he gets gentle. But I think the violence is part of also how he, smashes these images and conceits together and ramps up the. I'm going to start with one bizarre conceit and watch where I go with it. It's kind of in your face, saying, almost like a show off in a sense, but in a good way. And speaking of paradox, another poem I'll just briefly look at is the Annunciation and Passion. Now, this is paradox writ large, right, in the church year. So the Annunciation, March 25th, was actually, for the longest time in England, that was the New Year's Day. That was the day that the date of the calendar changed. Went from, the date of the year, should say, changed. But it was a major feast day. It still is, but it's probably observed more in the breach than observance now. But the Annunciation, that's when Mary says yes to the angel Gabriel. That starts salvation right there, right? So that's why it's a big feast day. But what do you do? And this happened once in a while. It happened. I can only remember once or twice it happening in the last couple of decades. But it's weird, because if it falls on the same day as Good Friday, what do you celebrate? And actually, according to church law, if they fall on the same day, that Good Friday has to change. Good Friday has to defer in a way to the Feast of the Annunciation, which is kind of radical if you think about it. But because there would be no Good Friday without the Annunciation. And so this poem is just an extended meditation upon this paradox. And I'll read a little bit of it. Timely, frail body, abstain today. Today my soul eats twice. Christ hither and away. She sees him man, so like God made in this, that of them both a circle emblem is, whose first and last concur. This doubtful day, of feast over fast, Christ came and went away. She sees him nothing twice at once, and who is all? She sees a cedar plant itself and fall, her maker put to making, and the head of life at once not yet alive and dead. She sees at once the Virgin Mother stay reclused at home, public at Golgotha. The she is his soul, right? Sad and rejoiced, she's seen it once. Seen at almost 50 now, the she is now the Virgin Mary. Interesting move, huh? And at scarce 15. At once the Son is promised her and gone. Gabriel gives Christ to her, he her to John. Not fully a mother, she's an orbity. At once receive her and the legacy. All this and all between, this day hath shown the bridgment of Christ's story, which makes one, as in plain maps the farthest west is east. Right? There again. So he's talking about this. All of a sudden it brings in cartography. Here's a conceit for you. Of the angels Ave and consummatum est, which is Christ's last words on the cross. How well the church, God's court of faculties, deals in sometimes and seldom joining these. What a poem. And so you can see this is where he lives for paradox. And this feast is, and I guess this is 1608 when those two feasts fell on the same day and on the English calendar. And this is it for, I mean, and you can, when we get to death's duel, you can, this is just the thing with it. Man, how can you meditate on the death of Christ? You know, or the, you know, how, and your own death, which brings you to Christ. So we think of death as a bad thing. It's a good thing, but no, it's not a good thing. It's a bad thing, right? A good thing is a bad thing, and a bad thing is a good thing. It's the paradox. Christ's death is a horrible thing. No, it's a good thing because it brought salvation, right? And these kinds of things intrigue and I think trouble Donne to a profound degree. Let's take a look at two more poems, I think. I mean, I could just go do every poem in the book, I'll tell you that. So, speaking Good Friday, another fine poem. Good Friday, 1613, Riding Westward. You see that? I could probably read the whole thing. I don't know. We'll see. Let man's soul be a sphere, and then in this, the intelligence that moves, devotion is. And as the other spheres, by being grown subject to foreign motions, lose their own, in being by others hurried every day, scarce an ear their natural form obey. Pleasure or business, so our souls admit for the first mover, and our world by it. Hence is it, that I am carried towards the west this day, when my soul's form bends toward the east. He does again. I mean, he's really interested in the soul, isn't he? And I love, that's one of my favorite lines of all poetry. Let man's soul be a sphere. And what is it that moves that sphere? Devotion. Right? And here he is, he's heading westward. Why does his soul form bend toward the east? Toward Jerusalem, the site of the crucifixion. And there should I see his sun by rising set. Paradox. Right? And of also a pun, meaning the sun of the sky, and also the Son of God. Right? So he's working with a pun there. And by that setting, endless day beget. So the sun sets and gives us endless day. Paradox. But that Christ on this cross did rise and fall, sin had eternally benighted all. Yet dare I almost be glad I do not see that spectacle of too much weight for me. That's another one of my favorite lines. The spectacle of too much weight. I mean, you can just meditate on that one on Good Friday. Who sees God's face, that his self-life must die. What a death were it then to see God die. That's the spectacle of too much weight. I mean, can we even handle this? Can you even comprehend it? This is, and I think when we get to these notions, and Donne, this is the heart of John Donne. This is the heart of John Donne. You know, these uncertainties. You know, the paradoxes of life, of faith, of a life in faith. I mean, how trust in God. I mean, it's a big theme of his in the poetry, and how do you, in the sermons as well. How do you do this? It seems impossible. It made his own lieutenant, or lieutenant, he would have said, nature shrink, made his footsole crack, and the sun wink. Could I behold those hands which spanned the poles, and turned all spheres at once, pierced with those holes? The creator of the universe? Pinned? And a little farther, I'll skip some. If on these things I durst not look, durst I upon his miserable mother cast mine eye? Who was God's partner here, and furnished thus half the sacrifice? You can see his Catholic side's coming through here, right? Which ransomed us? Now, interesting, a little side note, that Donne's mother, even though he converted, she never converted. She was recusant to the grave. And the funny thing is, she lived with him in the chancellery at St. Paul's in London, where he was the pastor. And she never went to church with the Anglicans. And after he died and they cleaning out his house, he had pictures of the Virgin Mary, which Jesus didn't do in the Anglican Church in those days. It's much different now, but he, so he still had a tremendous part of his psyche and his spiritual practice, I think, was pretty Catholic. Once Catholic, always Catholic, I'd say. And he continues, though these things as I ride be far from mine eye, they are present yet into my memory. For that looks towards them, thou looks towards me, O Savior. As thou hangest upon the tree, I turn my back to thee. This goes back, he's writing westward, right? He turns his back to Christ. I mean, talk about guilt. I turn my back, and this could even be part of his, he's got to have tremendous guilt for leaving the Catholic Church, especially with the amount of martyr's blood in his pedigree. I turn my back to thee, but to receive corrections, till thy mercies bid thee leave. Oh, think me worth thine anger, punish me. It's masochistic, huh? Burn off my rust and my deformity, restore thine image, so much by thy grace, that thou mayest know me, and I'll turn my face. Wow. That is so intense, isn't it? And so unexpected. He's thrown these things. What a mind to conceive of this. You can tell it's psychologically tremendously deep. He would have made, if psychology or psychiatry existed, he would have been a great one, because he's acutely aware, and we'll talk about this more next time, acutely aware of his inner life, of the condition of his soul. This is, certainly from the Jesuit tradition of the examination of conscience. Examination of one's motives, and it's so present in his poetry. And I think what we'll do is we'll end today with a poem. I assume he wrote it during the sickness, when he wrote Devotions Upon Emergent Occasions, but it could have been during his last sickness as well. He was not well for a long time. A hymn to God the Father. Wilt thou forgive the sin where I begun, which is my sin, though it were done before? Wilt thou forgive those sins through which I run, and do them still, though still I do deplore? When thou hast done, thou hast not done, for I have more. Right? Now, he's doing a lot of things here. First of all, as I begin, though it were done before. Get the joke? John Donne. This were done before. When thou hast done, thou hast not done. Right? But then for I have more. Here's another pun. His wife's name was Anne More. Right? And also there's an echo of St. Paul there when St. Paul says, he complains that, and I do that which I hate. He said, and Donne says here, the sins through which I run, and do them still, though still I do deplore. I do the thing that I hate, right? Wilt thou forgive that sin by which I won others to sin, and made my sin their door? Wilt thou forgive that sin which I did shun a year or two, but wallowed in a score? When thou hast done, thou hast not done, for I have more. I have a sin of fear, that when I've spun my last thread I shall perish on the shore. Swear by thyself that at my death thy sun shall shine as it shines now and heretofore. And having done that, thou hast done, I have no more. Interesting. What? When did I first hear about John Donne? I remember I dated some girl who hadn't gone to college yet, she had been in college. She'd said, "You're remind me of John Donne." I think it was because I was obsessed with religious questions, even when I wasn't necessarily behaving in a religious way. It's probably so. I think there's something to that. But anyway, I think that's good enough for this time. But read more of these poems. I mean, what a rich poet, and very often challenging. Very often challenging. But the challenge does not come without rewards. So we'll see you next time when we talk about his prose works.